side tangent just for a second.
So I don't know if I'm not answering your question.
No,
I'm trying to. I'm not trying to avoid it, but I'm trying to shift the conversation to another plane.
Yeah, no, you're actually wrapping around to something else that I want to bring up.
Okay.
In the same vein. Well, one of the things that seems to be happening is the federalization of a lot of things. Now, stepping back and going back to civics, we were built on the idea of federalism, where the federal government was to take care of a few things, do them exceedingly well, and everything else was to be left to the states and to civil society and the people therein.
Yep.
In this last century and a half, we've seen that just completely disappear, where civil society has been so squished, it's basically non-existent compared to what the founders first thought. And I know I'm ranging a little bit away from the education.
That's okay.
But do you feel that the federal Department of Education, which a lot of us think is just totally unnecessary and not one of the enumerated powers, do they get in the way? They offer a lot of money because it's the federal government, but do the strings attached make it worthwhile to do that? And I'll be bringing in another part of that.
Another Fed in a moment? Okay.
On Article 28A, just to give you a heads up. Is it the view of the Board of Education and the department to act as a buffer against that federalization of the education that goes on here in New Hampshire?
Again, I can't speak for the State Board of Education.
Right? But you know what their policies are.
I do know the policies, but again,
we don't. That's what I'm asking.
Yep. I just want to be careful to make sure that I'm on the record. I don't speak for the State Board of Education. So
I got it 3 times already.
Okay. And then I want to inject here. I mean, we've got Article 83 in our New Hampshire Constitution, which talks about a state level view of education, and so I think. The fact that it is enumerated in our Constitution gives us some guidelines as to what the state's role should be in that education. You pull in 28A, which is really kind of the top-down mandate that falls from the state down into the localized level.
Yeah, which for our readership, as a budget committee member, it's my favorite article in the New Hampshire Constitution, which basically forbids the state from sending unfunded mandates down to the local level. In other words, the state saying, you will do this, but we're not giving you any money.
Right. So I'm trying to think where we are with the question again, in terms of, so let me just talk, so from the feds versus state. So I do think that it is that the state is the right vehicle to focus on education, right? In other words, I think because it's enumerated in our Constitution, I think it's appropriate for the state of New Hampshire to be involved in education, right? In other words, our Constitution doesn't prescribe that it's just going to be the local control. So we want to manage at the state level as opposed to the feds intervening too much into that process. The feds do provide us, several $100 million of grants for a variety of programs that take place in the state. I will tell you that we do go through a process when we're looking at these different grants to decide, if I apply for this grant, it comes with, to your point, a lot of strings attached, whether it's information that I'm required to, keep track of and monitor, or certain trainings that are required to take place. And so we try and do a cost-benefit analysis in terms of, okay, so if I have this money, here's the effect that it will have on the system, helping move the education to, aspirations forward. Is it worth it in terms of cost? I've done that on a number of grants, and I will tell you that there's, for the most part, it's worth it to apply for the grant in terms of the cost and the benefit associated with it. But again, that I want to be careful because that presumes, remember, the money from the feds is not free. We just send it down there and then they send it back down to us. So we got to be very cognizant of that at some point the local taxpayer had to send that money someplace for it to get back to me to begin with. So when I'm making that kind of assessment or that determination of, is this worth it, recognizing that, okay, I'm getting back some of my local taxpayers' funding, is it worth it to be able to do that or not? So,
especially when some of that funding goes for only for so long, and then the requirement says, and then
correct, that would be part of
the local
has to pay for it.
Oftentimes we see that with firemen or police, where you get this grant. Oh, great! I can hire 2, 3, 4 more people. and at the end of 5 years, now you are stuck with the bill.
We try to be very careful to not take the bait or walk or step into the trap on those, is how I describe those. You know, they want to fund a position for 2 years and then it's on us after that. One of the things that you look at when you look at grants is they refer to as sustainability of the grant. In other words, like, okay, so when this money goes away, have we moved the needle, or did we just intervene for a short period of time, the money goes away, the program falls apart, and nothing happens? Like, that can be more disruptive to the long-term process anyway. So maybe you think that you've made progress, but in fact you've just disrupted the system for a period of time, and then it's just back to, you know, either where it was before or maybe it's worse. So you want to be careful that you don't disrupt, you know, the status quo in that sense.
Approximately how many of those grants fall into that particular category that you would refuse?
So I haven't refused any at this point in time. I have yet, you know, we don't apply. We apply for you know, a number of different grants, but we apply for the ones that we think are going to make sense. So I couldn't tell you if there's ones that we didn't apply for that didn't make sense, but we try to look at every one of them. Because before we accept that grant, I get what's referred to as some assurances that I have to make regarding the grant, and I am, you know, civilly liable for those assurances they have to make. Some of them, there was a Department of Justice grant, 13 pages of assurances that I have to sign off as an individual saying, we will do this, I will make sure of this, I will make sure of this. I'm like, that's a lot of assurances. Are we sure we want this thing? So let's go through and really look at what it is that we're signing up for and making sure that it's going to actually benefit our communities more than the cost of complying.
Crop